Guys, can we have a round of applause for Graham Van Damme of Jag Capital? Thank you very much, Graham. Welcome, Graham. How are you?
Thank you.
You well?
I'm good.
Yeah, excellent.
Very well.
So I had a little chat to you beforehand as well, so maybe afterwards in the Q&A we can delve into some of those other businesses, but this one that we're talking about there is very impressive. So can you give us a bit of an insight as to how you started off that
How it all
business?
come about?
Yeah.
Okay, so originally I was a mining engineer. I'd worked in Australia, Indonesia, in the UK, and then moved back to Australia in 2004. And at the time, I was offered a role with this drilling company that was based in Melbourne, basically on half the salary that I had been receiving working in the mining industry out in the back of the back of Queensland and Indonesia, or going back and working for BHP as a dragline engineer. And when I went for the interview, the guy, the owner at the time, Bill Sides, said to me, and he was in his 60s, basically said, look, within a couple of years you're going to be running this joint. And I was a 26-year-old and I thought, this sounds pretty cool. So I started with them, and then, it was a business that, very much first, second, third generation. So at one point it was the largest privately owned drilling company in the Southern Hemisphere. But unfortunately, through Bill's ownership, the market had changed, become a lot more compliant, there was a lot more competition, and they basically had struggled. They'd sold off their piling division that was very competitive in Melbourne. And, when I started with them, we only had about 15 employees. So you had an operations manager, you had a part-time bookkeeper, and about 15 staff. So we're turning about $4 million turnover a year, making no money. We basically, over the next 2 years, we had the amazing opportunity to partner with Woodside. So they were looking for a local company to tick the local content box on their tenders to do all their nearshore geotechnical drilling. So part of the drilling services that we did was all the site investigations that were close to coastal areas but off jack-up barges. But to do that for Woodside, you had to actually have, an Australian standard level type OH&S system, which is what, with them, I had developed. And that was a lot of my background with the mining companies and with Thies. And we just grew from that. So once we became a tier one contractor to Woodside, we basically could write our ticket because, all of the Chevrons and Woodsides and Fortescue Metals and BHPs and all these other companies then had a local supplier that ticked the local content, were able to deliver this thing. So rolls on to mid-2005, 2006, or leading into 2006, and we've gone 4 million, 6 million, 8 million in sales. We're starting to make some money. Bill tried to put the business on the market. I think in the 12 months he had it for sale, I think they had one person come through the door. And I just, flippantly said to one of the operations managers, I said, why the hell don't we buy it? And he sort of said, nah, he's kidding. Why would we want to buy this thing? I thought, well, shit, for the amount of money that's coming down the pipeline, why the hell not? So I started talking to all these PE firms and corporate advisories, and they're all talking about these 20 grand retainers each month and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, there's no hope in hell I can afford it. And I went to my business, my subsequent business partner. I said, he said, no, don't be silly. He said, he'll give it to us. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, we'll just buy it on vendor terms. And the promise was that we'd make him more money as our partner than he has in the previous 20 years. And so we basically bought it for nothing, bought 80% of it. And then we rode the mining boom. So, we did the desal project, we did the channel deepening, we did all of the Fortescue Metals expansions, all the Browse, Pluto, Blacktip, PNG, LNG, all the LNG projects. So we just rode this thing. So, and in those days, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is, pick an industry with tailwinds, because I've subsequently keep trying to relearn that one. But the thing is, even when we screwed up, we made money. So we, by this stage, 2000, we'd bought the business 2006, 2007, all of my business partners were 20 plus years older than me. And I'm looking at the market going, you know what, we need to work out, I've got massive key man risk here, so I've got to work out and get some other production drilling into it. So we started trying to acquire other companies, and the private equity companies, firms, were just buying these things on massive multiples. thought, bugger it, we'll sell it. So we did. So we ended up selling that thing for, what's that, an 8-figure number. Bill took more money off the table at that transaction than he had in the previous 20 years. We sold 80%, so we basically rolled up within this amalgamation of 3 drilling companies with a private equity firm. And then, so that we closed that deal in July 30th of June 2008, and Lehman Brothers went bust in September of that year. So we were on a trajectory, and they went like this. And I learnt from the PE guys that they just doubled down and they went and bought more companies, and then away we went. So we ended up exiting to Transfield for $575 million in 2010, and I lasted 3 months. So.
Okay, cool. I'm going to go back a few steps.
Yep.
I'm going to go back to your decision to come back and take half the salary of what you were earning before. What was the reason for that? Did you see the opportunity? Did you envisage to where you were going to get to with that opportunity?
There was definitely an element of, it was a smaller business, and the fact that, being a mining engineer at that time, there was bugger all opportunities in Melbourne, and my wife and I, we just literally spent 12 months backpacking through Europe. The previous 12 months I'd spent working on an 8-week on, 2-week off rolling roster, fly out of Indonesia, which I didn't want to do. And, Jo's work, she was in the paralegal field, so there wasn't a lot of calling for that sort of work up in Dysart and Emerald and those sort of areas in central Queensland. So we made a conscious decision we wanted to move back to Melbourne. There's a pipeline company that I looked at as well, but their pitch was, you'll be able to spend all this time travelling in Asia. And I'd done Asia. So it ended up ticking the boxes.
Cool. And also ticking boxes for compliance. And you talked about a little bit about the strategy of obviously being compliant as the local man on the ground within that organisation. So is that something that you always knew was going to grow the business? Did you envisage that as your strategy to take the company onto the next level? No,
I can't take any credit for that. I mean, they basically said to me, we hate paperwork. Do you know how to do it? And having come out of, Thies and the BHPs of the world, I knew how to put a QA system in place. I knew how to put an AHS in place. So that was what I was employed to do, was to build all those systems out, to commercialise, I suppose, their tendering processes. And make them more competitive, because it did get more competitive and more compliant. That was what I was engaged to do. So it was just the nature of where the industry was heading.
Yeah, cool. We had a little chat before as well about kind of the after effects of that buyout, and when you sold out and everything else. Can you give some insights as to kind of the barriers that you came up against after that?
Yeah, absolutely. You go from running your own show and basically in complete control. And I had business partners, but our board meetings per se was basically sitting around having a glass of scotch on a Friday afternoon, going, "What are we going to do next week? What's ahead of us? What are we going to bid for?" And that was the extent of it. Whereas when we moved into the PE with the PE guys, they without a doubt put a massive level of oversight and compliance, which wasn't a bad thing, but we absolutely have to step up and professionalise all of our systems and processes, because from day one we knew we were either going to list or we're going to sell to a listed company, and that was a phenomenal learning curve, But you go from, it was a case of, all right, Jim, I need to buy an engine. Do I buy an engine? Yep, go. Done. 2, all right, I've got to get approvals. And then during those days with the private equity guys, as long as you're within a budget, not a problem. But as soon as you miss your budget, they're all over you. So there was a lot of still freedom to operate. And then when we rolled off into the ASX company, very, very different culture, much, much bigger organisation, and just the levels of compliance and bureaucracy stepped down, which was, in my view, beyond what I was happy to operate in. So I ended up leaving pretty quickly.
Yeah. So how, throughout of all these processes, and obviously you're at the top of the scale there, how do you handle the stresses? What's your...
at the time when we were selling, I still remember the phone calls with the corporate advisories at 1 a.m. in the morning when we were doing the deal. We had The reason we sold for the business so well was we had no depth in the organisation. There was literally myself, my business partner who ran the operational side, I ran the commercial finance side, and we had an admin manager, and that was the management team. So you're running, you're pulling 60, 70-hour weeks, and then you do a transaction on top of that, which has got, all the hours and managing DD, and we had a good corporate advisory guys, but at the end of the day, we're the ones that got to answer the stuff. So at the end of that journey, I ended up spending a week in hospital, burnt out at the age of 31, and I've never, ever worked those sort of hours again. I chose not to, So how do I manage stress nowadays? It's, I'm in the office generally from 8:30. I get home generally at 5 o'clock. Monday to Friday. My business is a product business, not a service business. The business I have at the moment. I'm heavily involved with Scouts with my kids. We do a lot of travel. I've got a very good general manager that runs the day-to-day of the business, so I have zero client-facing, effectively zero supplier-facing role in my business now. And that comes with a cost, but at the same time, it gives me the freedom to be able to do what I choose to do. So, my view of business, and it's like with the accelerator program at EO that we involved with, for me, the businesses are there a vehicle to fund the lifestyle that I want to create for myself and my kids. I'm fortunate. I've ticked the box. I've got the T-shirt for growing the big business, and I've had the massive staff and the rest of it, and I just don't want to play in that space anymore. So yeah.
Cool. And obviously you talked about the burnout at 31. What were some of the things that maybe some of the hurdles that you came across, the big kind of blockers for yourself that made things really difficult?
Oh, it's not so much blockers, it's just workload. I mean, at the end of the day, with service businesses, I mean, we're all contractors, so, it's highly competitive. We're working on, massive projects. I mean, the Browse, Pluto projects, they're multi-billion-dollar projects. So, the likes of Woodside and those sort of companies, they really, their tolerance for delays and all the rest of it, and particularly we were generally the first contractor in there, is just zero. So, you have to perform, otherwise you're only as good as your last deal or your last project, otherwise you're not going to get the next one. And then you overlay that where, myself and I had 4 business partners, they were relying on me to get the deal done. And sure, there was elements where they were contributing, but, it was I sort of made my bed, I had to sleep in it. So I sort of led it down this path that I thought it was a good idea, let's have a crack and let's see what happens. Well, you look around and a business of that size, you sort of try to turn around and see who's going to take up the slack, and there's no one behind you, it's left to you. So it's just the nature of the game, working in the businesses that we work in.
Yeah. And if we look to where you are today, you've got a new business, which is the engines. You're in the engines game. So can you give us a little bit of an insight to that and how your decisions and kind of the way in which you want to manage that business is different to how you used to do things?
Yeah, so I got out of the drilling company thinking I knew everything and started playing in the venture capital and seed investment stage stuff. And lost a lot of money in IT, waste, all sorts of other silly crap I shouldn't have gone anywhere near. I bought this business 5 years ago because at that stage I was involved in these other companies, which I subsequently have gotten out of or shut down. It was a solid business, it'd been around for 30 years, it was a product, not a service, it had a good solid team run under management. It was in the automotive space, which I thought was, a cottage industry, which is like similar to the drilling, where I'd be able to, consolidate and do what I did with the drilling company, which, and then you get in there and you get a 20% hit on the top line, and all of a sudden you're in turnaround phase pretty quick. So whilst, yes, it ticks all the boxes, the business is, I've gone, that's what I said, the drilling company, had a business at tailwinds, and now I'm facing headwinds, and then you overlay the thematic of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and an ageing workforce, an industry that people don't want to be employed in, Chinese imports. I don't know many other competitive games. It's an interesting game. So it's not one, if I had made, it's interesting. I go through my decision logics. I think the decision would have still been the same because I don't fault the decision process. just in hindsight, I should never have actually taken the original IM.
Okay.
So, but it's just the nature of it, yeah. So.
Yeah, and you talked a lot about processes as well in the earlier days, obviously with the drilling firm. Did you install those processes or similar ones in the field that you're in now?
No, we have, but I inherited an awful lot of it. So this business was highly systemised. The previous owners had basically had taken an industry where reconditioning an engine or a cylinder head and formalised it so it's effectively remanufacturing by numbers. So, as a result of it, I haven't needed the same level of skill sets to be able to do, the majority of our product, although we're now finding it getting even more complicated. So that's a challenge in itself. But, as far as the rest of the operation goes, we've boosted the OH&S area, but everything else was effectively there, but we've just been tweaking it. We had I didn't realise we're actually at MYOB, but we just actually rolled out their new MYOB Advanced. So the sales process has gone from 72 steps, individual items, down to about 8. So, we're just constantly trying to improve how we go about, and that, one of my core values is continuously improve. So we're trying to instill that in the business and make things a lot more efficient. We have to. We used to have 28 staff, turning over $4.5 million. I'm turning over $4 million now with 17 staff. It's not to say I'm making more money. It's just the margins have got squeezed so much that we just know we're able to operate with that sort of overhead that we used to have. So.
So looking at the staff as well then, do you spend some time obviously trying to improve them, or is it to kind of get them in as ready finished articles? Or?
No, average tenure in my business I think is about 17 years. Mm-hmm. So, we've got a few young guys that are in there now. You try and encourage them to do apprenticeships and stuff like that. We've got one of the older guys has been there for I think probably 15 years. He went off and did a mature age apprenticeship. But when you look at the cost return, it's not that attractive in the auto space. So, and unfortunately with, without getting too political, but, when we decided in our wisdom to get rid of tech schools, that killed the trades, because now what we've got is, there's none of that foundation to be able to get into the trades or the TAFE program to be able to get, the kids into this sort of industry. So it is, extremely challenging. We look at overseas employee, my workforce is literally the United Nations. I think, 90% of my workforce are first generation Australians, as in immigrants, sorry. And one of the things when you look at that workforce that is absolutely clear as day is A, their resilience, but two, the fact is that their work ethics, because they've burnt their bridges, they're not going home, and they've got to make it work here. So, as far as work ethic and resilience and all that sort of stuff goes, it's absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Okay. So, and also, we spoke a lot before about values as well. So, do you have to make sure, obviously you talked about resilience and the hard work ethic there. Is there any other values that you hold close to your heart, your organisation?
Yeah, we do. We, my philosophy is, as far as R&D goes, it's rip off and duplicate. So I was really disappointed when I walked through the front door and I said, we help businesses succeed, because our mission is we help independent mechanics succeed. And I've had that since I bought the business. We continuously improve. We've ripped off Atlassian's things so we don't screw our clients. We've tried to, so we run through these sort of things, open and honest, the integrity type thing. You sort of say, well, we want to have, your own word, you open and honest conversations. So one of the questions I always ask is, when is it okay to lie? And if you're a parent, you say, well, so it's an interesting way of seeing where people's views of that is. So that's, I don't have them plastered all over the walls, but we are continuously talking about it. The business I inherited, which I bought, you had situations where the sales team didn't actually know what promotions were actually in the marketplace at the time. Whereas I've walked in there and, very candidly, and we had to because we had to do a restructure pretty quickly, was, here's the revenue numbers, here's the profit numbers, this is what it costs to actually produce a product, and that's why it's no longer competitive. And just, continuously communicating it. And it gets to the point where now I know I've got a workforce on the factory floor that are knocking down my door telling me they want me to get back in front of them and talk to them because I haven't done it for a few weeks. Next week. We'll get there next week.
Keeping them on the same path, right?
Well, it's not so much.
Journey.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they want to know where they're going. So they're not. They're not silly. They know they can see the industry wins as well. So that's yeah.
Guys, we're going to have to hold it there. Coming to an end for that second guest speaker's talk. So, guys, can we have a round of applause for Graham Van Dam, please? Graham Van Dam, thank you very much.